Before I learned the techniques I'm about to show you, I wasted so much time trying to fix mixes by randomly boosting and cutting frequencies. And honestly, most of the time I made things worse. I didn't really understand the frequency spectrum. I didn't know where the problem areas were, or why my mixes sounded muddy or boomy, or overly sibilant. I was guessing instead of making informed decisions. Once I finally learned what actually happens in each frequency range, everything changed. I could hear problems faster, fix them with intention, and stop chasing my tail with endless EQ moves. If you ever felt like that, then my goal with this video is to guide you in the right direction and help you eliminate all the guesswork. Here's the agenda for today. First, we'll go through dealing with low end, then dealing with the mids, dealing with high end. We'll also go through tips on how to train your ear, plus a few extra tricks you can use right away. By the end, you'll know exactly where the common issues hide and how to fix them quickly, using the techniques I've learned from Mix with the Masters, YouTube, and years of trial and error. Let's dive in. Dealing with frequencies in the low end. When working on the low end, it's easy to jump straight into advanced tools, sidechain, multiband, clipping, saturation, dynamic EQ, all the fun stuff. But in reality, most low-end problems come from something much simpler, the balance between the first 4 octaves. I find it easier to think of music in octaves rather than frequencies. Octave 1 starts at 20 Hz and goes up to 40. Octave 2 is between 40 and 80 Hz. Octave 3 is around 80 to 160 Hz. And octave 4 is at 160 to 320 Hz. Once you know what's going on between 20 and 300 Hz, shaping the weight, punch, and clarity of your low end becomes much easier. The 3 low end zones, the stuff that really matters. 20 to 40 Hz. Deep sub-energy. This is the feel it more than hear it range. Too much here and your mixes become slow, rumbly, and unfocused. Club systems will exaggerate this area a lot. Sometimes trimming a little here immediately tightens the entire low end. 40 to 80 Hz. The fundamentals, kick and bass. This is where the actual music notes of the kick and bass live. If this range isn't balanced, everything falls apart. This is also where your kick length matters, especially in house and EDM genre. On a 4 on the floor kick that's too long, over 250 milliseconds depending on tempo, it will smear the groove and ring too long on big PA systems. Shorten the tail and the whole track suddenly feels faster and cleaner. 80 to 160 Hz, punch, definition, and small speaker translation. If your kick has no punch or your bass sounds blurry on small speakers, the issue is almost always here. This range gives you shape, attack, and note definition, but too much energy here creates boxiness or a muddy cloud that sits on top of your mix. I want to introduce a 4th zone as well, and it's in the 4th octave, 160 to 300 Hz, and this is where the low mids live. This is where the mixes often gets congested. Guitars, piano, synths, vocals, everything has content here. This zone can add warmth and fullness, but too much creates mud instantly, so not having control over this area will also affect the low end in a very negative way. A simple way to shape the low end. Instead of reaching for aggressive processing right away and mixing individual tracks, use this simple 3-step approach to get your low end under control. 1. Set the size of your low end with a low shelf. I have a group channel where both kick and bass are routed, and I load an EQ like Pro Q on that group. Start with a broad, low shelf around 80 to 150 Hz. Ask yourself 2 simple questions. Is the low end overwhelming the rest of the mix? If it feels like the lows are taking over compared to the mids and highs, try reducing around 1 to 2 decibels. Does it feel weak or thin? Then give it a gentle boost. Usually up to 1 decibel is enough. But here's the thing. Depending on your setup, you might not even hear the low end properly. Maybe your speakers are too small, maybe you're on headphones, or your room just doesn't support those deeper frequencies. So, instead of relying only on your ears, use your eyes as well. Drop a few reference tracks into your session and put a frequency analyzer on each one. As you listen through them, keep an eye on how the low end, mids, and highs are balanced. You'll notice that well-mixed songs in your genre tend to follow a very clear shape in the spectrum. When you compare your own mix to those references, both by listening and visually looking at the analyzer, it becomes much easier to judge whether your low end is too dominant, too weak, or sitting right where it should. It gives you a super clear target to aim for, even if your monitoring situation isn't perfect. This step sets the overall size and weight of your low end. Even 1 decibel move here can completely reset the foundation of your mix. 2. Redistribute energy across the 3 low-end octaves. Octave 1, 20 to 40 Hz. Boost when you need more depth or weight. Cut when the sub starts to feel out of control or overly boomy. This range carries a lot of energy, so if it's too strong, it eats up your headroom and makes the whole mix feel unstable. Keep it short. Long, boomy sub makes the low end slow and messy. Octave 2, 40 to 80 Hz. Boost when you want more thump or body in the kick or bass. A great starting point is the root note of the song. It helps the kick sit naturally with the bass. Cut when your kick and bass feels too heavy, thick, or fight with the vocals. Octave 3, 80 to 160 Hz. Boost when you need more attack, presence, or definition in the low end. Cut when the low end feels muddy or resonant in the room. This step is less about big boosts. It's more about shaping where the energy lives. Control the speed and depth of the low end. I very rarely high-pass a kick. This is mainly since most of my kicks come from sample packs or created in a drum machine. Therefore, I know that I will not have the room noise and rumble you get when you record a kick with a microphone. Check this for example. I'm using a high-pass filter with very subtle settings, 12 decibel per octave slope, and the filter is at around 20 Hz. With the EQ on, I actually get 1 decibel louder output after the EQ. That's because the filter shifts phase and reshapes the waveform, not because you gained actual energy. What I do instead, I go to the individual tracks, kick and bass, and fix things where the problem lives. For example, if the bass is masking the kick, I'll use a sidechain compression. If there is boominess, I'll use a gentle low shelf prior to high-pass filter. If the kick needs tightening, I'll control it with transient tools or EQ, not by cutting the fundamental. Phase cancellation. Understanding how and why phase cancellation occurs is very important for music producers in order to achieve the best result possible. Phase cancellation happens when two or more sound waves play at the same time and can either reinforce each other, meaning they are 100% in phase, or they can cancel each other out, meaning they are out of phase. They are more pronounced in the low end since low frequencies have longer wavelength than mid and high frequencies. The result of sounds being out of phase in the low end is thinner kick and bass, less clarity, depth and power. Maybe you notice how your low end suddenly gets weaker on certain notes, or the punch disappears, simply uneven frequency response. Key insight: you cannot fix phase cancellation with EQ. If two sounds are cancelling each other out, no amount of boosting or cutting with EQ will bring back what's literally disappearing in the waveform. Phase problems have to be fixed in the sound design or production phase, not the mixing phase. Here's what you can do. Adjusting the starting point of a sample. Zoom in on the kick and bass, for example, and visually check how the waveforms line up. Are they moving up and down in the same direction, or is there a difference in polarity between the sounds? Polarity refers to the orientation of the waveforms. If you have negative polarity, it means the sound wave is heading downwards and positive waveform is heading upwards. Make sure they're not cancelling each other out at different notes across the whole 4-bar loop. Changing the pitch. Even a semitone or a few cents can shift the phase relationship between layers. This often turns a weak, hollow sound into a solid one, because the peaks and troughs suddenly align better. Changing the waveform, switching from a sine to a triangle, or from a saw to a square completely changes the harmonic content. Different harmonics equal different phase interactions. This alone can eliminate the cancellation. Nudging the timing a few milliseconds, tiny timing adjustments, 1 to 10 milliseconds, can solve phase issues instantly. You're basically shifting the waveform until the transients reinforce instead of cancel. Choose different layers that actually work together. Sometimes two sounds just won't align no matter what. Replacing one layer with a sound that has more compatible transient or harmonic shape is often the fastest solution. Listen to the track in mono. When you sum your left and right channel to mono, any phase issues, phase cancellations or reinforcements become much more obvious. If elements disappear, lose punch or sound hollow in mono, it's clear sign that the stereo versions are cancelling each other out. High pass filter. The low end is like the VIP area in a nightclub. Only the kick and bass are on the list. All other instruments get stopped at the door by a high-pass filter. I usually start by high-passing individual tracks using Cubase built-in EQ. I also apply high-pass filters on a group channel. The thing is, if you only high-pass the track and then, for example, add a saturation effect on the group, you'll likely introduce extra low-end harmonics. That's why applying high-pass cuts at several stages in the mix is a smart strategy. When removing low end with high-pass filter, it is important not to use too steep slope, since that can create phase artifacts you don't want. 18 decibels per octave is most of the time good starting point. Everything that is recorded with a microphone usually has some low-end rumble. For example, when I record vocals in my room, there is always some rumble introduced, so using a high-pass filter removing around 100 to 120 Hz removes that information that does not give any value to the vocals. Key insight: if you don't know how much to cut with the high-pass filter, bring up the filter until the body of the track feels too thin and then pull it back to where the most important tone of the track still remains. Anything below that range will not contribute to your low end, so that can simply be removed. Sidechain. When you think about sidechain in the low end, you usually think about sidechaining the bass to the kick, and that's great, you should definitely do that. But there's another step people almost never talk about: the final low end rumble removal stage. This is where you sidechain your other groups, vocals, keys, guitars, FX, basically anything that can spill into the low end and clutter up the kick and bass. I learned this trick from a mix with the Masters tutorial. I put Soothe 2 on all my group channels right before they hit the tubas. With the settings I'm showing you here, each Soothe instance is sidechained to the kick, gently dipping around 100 to 200 Hz every time the kick hits. It's subtle, it's clean, and it keeps the low end focused without killing the tone of the instruments. Bonus tips when mixing low end. Use studio monitors that reveal as much detail as possible and provide a balanced, even frequency response across the full spectrum, from 20 Hz to 20 kHz. For most home studio producers, a two-way near-field speaker is what will work the best. I use 3 different pairs of speakers. My main speakers are the PSI Audio A17M. These are quite expensive, but really great sounding speakers that I have used for over 4 years and know them quite well by now. My second speakers are Yamaha HS80M. These are bigger and have an 8-inch woofer, bringing out the low end better than my PSI Audio, which has a 6.5-inch woofer. And my third speakers are the Avantone Mix Cube. These monitors sound like crap, but if you can get your song to sound okay on these monitors, then you have done quite a good job. Treating your room is crucial in order to get a tight low end. Poorly treated rooms will make the low end a huge problem due to standing waves phenomenon. Standing waves means waveforms bouncing back and forth between walls, making some frequencies being amplified or attenuated at different points in the studio. Corners are where standing waves and bass build-up are strongest. Play a song in your studio and while playing, move to different locations. Lastly, stand in a corner. Now you will hear the low end much more since the low frequencies stack in the corners. I have treated my room with absorbers and diffusers. Absorbers reduce sound reflections by converting sound energy into heat. They remove energy, especially mids and highs, and also lows if they are thick, which reduces echo, flutter, and overall room ringing. Diffusers don't remove sound, they spread it out. They scatter reflections in many directions, which keeps the room lively but prevents harsh echoes or focused reflections. With a good pair of headphones, you'll get rid of all the issues you get from the room. Headphones typically operate well from 80 Hz, so the lowest sub will not work well to mix in headphones. I am using AKJK872, which are super clear and work perfectly for mixing low end. Dealing with frequencies in the mid-range. Let's take a look at the mid-frequency range, which spans from around 250 Hz and all the way to 4K. In the mid-frequency cluster, we have the associated frequencies, known as the harmonics, which give identity to the sound source, allowing the listener to identify what they actually are hearing. Here we can split it up further. The lower mid-range spans from 250 to 500 Hz and is a crucial part of the audio spectrum for shaping the character of a sound. It contains the fundamental frequencies of many acoustic instruments. The low mids give the vocal warmth and body, making it sound full and natural. Mid-range, 500 to 2K. This is the core of the mix. Most instruments live here, including vocals, guitars, pianos, and many woodwinds. It's where the body and character of these sounds are most prominent. Be careful. Adding too much elements in this range can make the mix muddy and congested very quickly. Upper mids, 2K to 4K. The overall presence and clarity of a mix is best heard here. You'll find the attack of your percussion and rhythm instruments in this range. However, this range is perceived to be the loudest to humans out of all other ranges. Too much boosting here can cause ear fatigue. Nail the mid-range and the rest will follow. Here's a bold statement. During the mixing phase, spend 70% of your time on the mid-range, 15% on the low end and 15% on the high end. And here's why. If you look at how people actually listen to music today, phones, earbuds, small speakers, the mid-range is what survives. So in the mixing phase, you should be spending the majority of your time shaping the mid-range. It's where your song communicates, where the vocal lives, where the energy is. Get the mids right and the whole mix snaps into place. That's why focusing on the mid-range from about 250 Hz up to 4K is one of the smartest moves you can make. I usually don't talk much about studio gear, but in this case, I have to highlight the benefits of investing in a pair of mid-range focused monitors. I picked up a pair of Aventone mix cubes a couple of weeks ago, and the first time I played music through them, I honestly thought something was wrong. They sounded awful compared to my PSE monitors, which cost 8 times more approximately. But after using the mix cubes while referencing other tracks and switching back and forth with my main monitors, something happened. I started to actually understand the mid-range. There is definitely a learning curve, but once you get used to how they translate, you'll start mixing differently. At least that's what happened to me. The real energy of a mix lives in the 1 to 5K range. This used to be an area I didn't pay much attention to, but as my skills developed and as I got those mid-range monitors, I started leaning into this area more. And honestly, EQ moves here have a massive impact on how a song feels. Since most elements in your mix live somewhere in the mid-range, you need to decide which sounds to get to be up front and which ones belong more in the background. You know, felt rather than heard. This is where tools like reverb, automation, and panning become super important for creating space and clarity. How to leave space for the vocals. When dealing with lead vocals, it's easy to assume that in order to have it loud and clear, we in a full mix start with compressing and EQing the vocals, use effects, parallel compressions, etc. But in reality, and what I have learned through the years, is that the first step is to make space for the vocals to enter. It's like you save a seat around the table for the lead vocals, not press it in on a full table. What I mean with that is we first need to know where the vocal fundamentals are. Lead vocal fundamentals live between 100 to 600 Hz. Here is the main body and warmth of a vocal, but be careful, here is also where the muddiness lives. We also have honkiness in 500 to 2K. Sibilance reach in the upper mid territory at 2K to 8K. 2 to 4K is a magical spectral area for the vocals. A little boost here can make the vocals step forward and be more upfront. At the same time, between 1.8 and 2.5K, you'll find the really annoying frequency. This range I usually bring down 2 to 3 decibels with dynamic EQ.
I hear the wind, hear it call, whispering endlessly. I see the dark, see the sunrise, shadows follow me. I touch the flames, but they burn, leaving scars on me. I hear the wind whispering your soul away from me. When everything's out, I hear the wind, hear it call, whispering endlessly. I see the dark, see the sun. I touch the flames, but they burn, leaving scars on me. I hear the wind whispering your soul away from me. When everything's out, I hear the wind, hear it call, whispering endlessly. I see the dark, see the sunrise, shadows follow me.
Finding clarity and presence without harshness. When we talk about mid-range, one of the biggest challenges is finding that sweet spot where your mix feels clear, present, and energetic, but not harsh, not nasal, and not tiring for the listener. All this is usually handled and taken care of between 1K and 4K. This range is incredibly sensitive because the human ear is naturally tuned to it. Our hearing evolved to focus on the frequencies where speech lives. So when this area is clean, controlled, and balanced, the whole mix feels professional. But if it's even slightly off, the entire track starts to feel cheap, brittle, and shouty. So here's the mindset shift. Presence doesn't come from boosting. It comes from managing competition. For every instrument that needs presence, like vocals, guitars, snares, pianos, plucks, synth leads, there are several others that don't need it as much. If everyone is living in the 1 to 4K region at full volume, no one stands out. Here are the practical steps. First, identify your lead element in this range, the track that will stand out and be upfront, usually the vocals, sometimes a synth lead or a guitar lead. 2. Carve out space for the lead element by gently reducing in the area of 1 to 4K in the competing tracks, not by boosting the lead element itself. 3. Use dynamic EQ or multiband compression to control peaks in this region without killing the natural brightness. 4. Tame harsh resonances, especially in digital synths, aggressive guitars, and stacked vocals. 5. Trust small moves. Even 1 to 2 decibel changes here can transform the entire mix. If you get this area right, you'll notice the whole mix opens up, the vocal sits naturally, and your track becomes much easier to listen to at high volumes. Managing instrument density in the mid-range. The mid-range, especially 500 Hz to 2K, is where almost every musical element competes for attention. Guitars, pianos, vocals, synths, strings, FX, percussion, they all live here. Because of that, this is the range that most easily becomes muddy, boxy, or unfocused. This is called masking. Masking is when 2 or more sounds occupy the same or very similar frequency range, and the louder or more dominant one hides the other. Your ear can't clearly separate them, so one sound loses clarity, detail, or even disappears completely. Once you understand masking, the next step is learning how to place sounds in your mix. Mixing is basically arranging instruments inside a 3-dimensional space. You have 3 tools. 1. Left to right. Panning. If 2 instruments are fighting in the same frequency area, sometimes you don't even need EQ. Just move one a bit left or right, suddenly both become clear. Think of this as giving each sound its own lane in the stereo field. 2. Front to back. Depth. Reverb and delay help you decide what sits up front and what sits further back. Dry equals closer. More reverb equals further away. This is super helpful when you want certain instruments to support the mix without taking attention from the main track, like the vocal. Here is a great tip I use that I got from the mixing master Jason Joshua. It doesn't matter what reverb you use, but I just happen to have the same reverb he uses, and that is TrueVerb from Waves. What you need to do is to bring the room all the way back and put the sound behind the room. Turn off the reverb and turn down the early reflection to around minus 24 decibels and adjust to taste. Also, the distance decides how much the sound goes front or back behind the other tracks. Three. Up and down. Volume. Volume is the simplest tool for separation. If something isn't supposed to lead the mix, turn it down. Not every track needs to be in the spotlight. Some should just add texture. When you use panning, depth, and volume together, your mid-range opens up and lead elements like vocal, for example, get space, and the mix feels balanced without forcing EQ to do all the work. Some additional tips in the early stage of your production is to try different octaves on similar sounds. Acoustic guitar and piano, for example. That simple move can eliminate the instruments masking one another. Another tip, as your song progresses, it's easy to get into the creative zone and add track after track. And it is great to introduce new elements to a song, but remember, some already familiar sound can disappear from a short moment. This is a very common trick the pros use. For example, automate a track so you clearly hear it in the first bar and then slowly turn down the volume. You will still perceive that sound, but it is now turned down in volume, and then after say 4 bars, it comes up again in a louder volume just so you hear it again. Another great tip is movement. Here are some examples on how I manage movement on percussions, for example.
Why do you do this? Right in the moment. Optimist, I make the best of it.
Dealing with frequencies in the high end, the highs start around 6K and go all the way up to 20K. This area is responsible for sparkle, air, clarity, and the sharp transient detail that makes a mix feel alive. But just like the mid-range, our ears are extremely sensitive here. Too much high end makes the music sound thin, harsh, sibilant, and tiring to listen to. I'll show you an example. When I boost the highs, it quickly becomes piercing and uncomfortable. Now listen to the same song with too little high end. It instantly becomes dull, dark, and lifeless. So the goal is to find the right balance between presence and softness. Key insight. Bright sounds are always perceived as closer to the listener. Keep that in mind when mixing the highs. If something should be up front, like the lead vocal, it usually needs more high-end energy than background elements such as pads, guitars, or supporting textures. As always, referencing similar songs to the ones you're working on is one of the best ways to understand the right high-end balance. When you look at the frequency curve of well-mixed tracks, you'll notice that most of them follow a gentle downward slope toward the highs. Try to aim for a similar shape in your own mix, not by copying it exactly, but by using it as guide to keep your top end controlled, musical, and in line with what listeners are used to hear. Air and sparkle. When people talk about air in a mix, they're almost always talking about the very top of the spectrum, roughly around 10 to 20K. This area doesn't carry musical notes. It carries the feeling of openness, space, and polish. As Dave Pensado would say, this is where the money is. When a mix feels expansive, modern, and hi-fi, it's usually because the air band is balanced just right. But here's the tricky part. Too little air and the mix sounds dull, flat, like a blanket is over the speakers. Too much air, everything gets brittle and hyped, and the mix becomes uncomfortable really fast. A lot of producers try to fix dullness by boosting the highs aggressively, and the result is kind of fake brightness, where the mix sounds brighter but not better. When you push too much air, cymbals turn glassy, vocals get sharp, and the whole mix feels fragile. A better approach is subtlety, a gentle wide boost on transparent EQ, something like a shelf around 10 or 12K. Can add clarity without distorting the natural tone of your instrument. And here's a key point. Air is not just EQing, it starts in the arrangement. If you want air, don't stack too many tracks with high end. Don't drown your mix in reverb. Clear space first, then enhance. Key insight. If your song needs clarity and high end, don't always go for EQ moves in the high end. When you reduce in low end, mid-range, and then gain match, your track automatically becomes brighter sounding. A final reminder, earbuds and phone speakers exaggerate the top end. So when you think just a bit more sparkle, check on your second pair of monitors or reference tracks. You might be closer than you think. Stereo image in the high end. The high end is where your stereo image really opens up. Bass lives mostly in mono. Mids spread out a bit, but the highs, they're often where the width comes from. But width can be both a gift and a trap. Bright instruments tend to feel wide by nature. Cymbals, shakers, hi-hats, certain synths. They contain fast transients and high-frequency energy, which our brain uses to locate sound in space. The trick is knowing how to use that width without making the mix unstable. Here's what you should keep in mind. 1. Keep the important stuff centered. Lead vocals, kick, snare. Anything that drives the song belongs in the center. If your highs are too wide on these key tracks, the mix loses focus. 2. Push supporting elements outward. Percussion, background vocals, textures, risers, pads, these can all live wider. Panning them left and right gives your mix air, movement, and a sense of space. 3. Don't use stereo wideners on the whole mix. This is a common mistake. Wideners often distort the phase in the high frequencies, which sounds exciting in the headphones, but collapses in mono and becomes messy on speakers. If you want width, create it at the track level. 4. Check your mix in mono. High-frequency widening is the first thing to disappear when collapsing to mono. If elements vanish or lose energy, you've pushed the stereo spread too far. When used right, the high end becomes the breathing room of your mix, the place where everything feels open and cinematic. But when used carelessly, it becomes sharp, phasey, and unstable. Use width as a design tool. Decide what should wrap around the listener and what should stay dead center. Digital harshness and saturation. When you add gentle tape, tube, or transformer-style saturation, you're basically introducing a small amount of harmonic thickness around the sound. Saturation naturally rounds the edges of the transients, softens aggressive spikes, and gives the highs a smoother and more musical character. Tape saturation tends to roll off the extreme highs in a soft, natural way. It's like smoothing a sharp digital edge with a warm, analog brush. Tube saturation adds a bit of harmonic richness in the mids, giving the high end something solid to sit on instead of just sounding brittle or piercing. Another technique is using analog style compression with slow attack and fast release. This can gently tame harsh transients before they become a problem, and it adds a sense of weight that balances the brightness. And if you want more modern approach, tools like Soothe 2, Smooth, Operator, or other dynamic resonance suppressors can help control sharp spikes in the 5 to 12K area. The key with these plugins is subtlety. You're not trying to kill the high end, just smooth the peaks so the highs remain present without being painful. I created a chart that breaks down the low end, mid-range, and high end, and explains how different amounts of each frequency can change the way your mix feels. Training your ears. Use ear training tools. Websites like Sound Gym or Train Your Ears are incredible. They give you exercises where you guess frequency boosts, cuts, dynamic changes, or stereo placement. Doing this just 10 minutes a day will sharpen your hearing more than months of random mixing. I did this for 1 year and I really learned a lot about where bad frequencies are in the mix. My favorite is the Peak Master in Sound Gym. Song reproduction for learning. Remaking a song can feel time-consuming and difficult at first, but trust me, it's one of the most powerful ways to improve your sound design, arrangement, and mixing decisions while training your ear. When I started doing this, it completely changed how I produced music. I got more inspired, I understood mixes better, and I even started finishing my own tracks much faster. You don't need to remake every single detail of the original. I usually focus on the intro, the verse, and the chorus or drop. That's enough to learn a lot. And as you do this, you start hearing things you never noticed when casually listening. Tiny background movements, subtle pads, small effects, textures, little rhythmic elements, all the stuff that makes the track feel alive but easy to miss. This exercise forces your ears to zoom in on details, teaches you how sounds are layered, and helps you understand why certain mix choices were made. And over the time, you'll naturally start bringing those insights into your own productions. Analyzing songs. A faster approach than full song reproduction is analyzing and documenting the sounds instead of recreating them. I like to do this with a simple template. The rows list all the instruments, and the columns represent the different sections of the song. For example, I analyzed a Selena Gomez track this way. I listened carefully and wrote down what I heard, describing the sounds and their roles in each section. This method trains your ear, helps you understand arrangement, sound design, and mixing decisions, all without spending hours trying to recreate every track. Listen in different playback systems. Don't just rely on your studio monitors. Try listening on earbuds, a Bluetooth speaker, your car, or even your phone's built-in speaker. Each system reproduces frequencies differently, so this will help you hear which elements really stand out and which might get lost. Over time, this trains your ear to focus on what truly matters in a mix, ensuring it translates well and everywhere your listeners might play it.